A critical examination of illusionism. Whether or not illusionism is growing in acceptance, I do not know. However, it does appear that illusionism is receiving more and more attention in the contemporary philosophical scene. The following essay is a brief analysis of an assumption that lies at the heart of illusionism. Illusionists usually invoke the terms qualia, phenomenal properties, phenomenal qualities, phenomenal characters, what its likenesses, and sensory qualities when discussing their views. For the sake of clarity and uniformity, I'm going to be using the term sensory qualities as a substitute. The program and platform of illusionism is summarized in the following passage by its most active proponent, Keith Frankish. Illusionism holds that sensory qualities are an illusion and aims to explain why it seems that sensory qualities exist. I shall refer to the problem of explaining why experiences seem to have sensory qualities as the illusion problem. Illusionists deny that experiences have sensory qualities and focus on explaining why they seem to have them. They typically allow that we are introspectively aware of our sensory states, but argue that this awareness is partial and distorted, leading us to misrepresent the states as having sensory qualities. Frankish, Illusionism as a Theory of Consciousness, pages 1 through 3. Illusionism, in other words, is the view that sensory qualities do not, in fact, exist as features of anything in the world. No sensory quality is instantiated anywhere in the world. Nothing, whether it be an object or an experience, has sensory qualities. If an object or experience seems to have sensory qualities, it is because our brain's introspective mechanisms have misrepresented the object or experience as having them. So much, then, for illusionism. In defending illusionism, Keith Frankish makes heavy use of representations. But what is a representation? In cognitive science, a representation is understood as being a structure that stands for something by virtue of relations such as similarity, causal history, and connections with other representations. Frankish uses the term representation in a similar way. First, how do I use the term representation? I use it in its standard sense in cognitive science for a brain state, a pattern of neuron firing, that serves as a proxy for something else, producing psychological effects appropriate to the presence of the thing. They are part of the neural machinery that makes us aware of the things they represent. Frankish, Illusionism and its Place in Contemporary Philosophy of Mind, page 304. I'll accept this account of representations for the sake of argument. Frankish's illusionism cannot get off the ground unless it can establish the truth or plausibility of the following proposition. There exist representations of sensory qualities, e.g., a representation of the sensory quality of redness, that not only do not have the particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities they represent, but are themselves totally devoid of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of any determinable kind. This is a very strong claim, and Frankish must adequately defend it without recourse to faith, intuition, or revelation. This is how Frankish defends illusionism's foundation stone. It is true that cognitive scientists talk of there being representations in the brain. Representations in this sense are parts of the machinery that makes us aware of things. Such representations need not share properties with the things they represent. The mental representation of redness need not be red, any more than the word red or the numeral that denotes red in a painting by numbers kit. These representations of sensory qualities don't have sensory qualities, of course. Rather, they are patterns of neuron firing that signal the presence of sensory qualities, in much the same way that written words signal the presence of things. Frankish, what if your consciousness is an illusion created by your brain? Page 5. When illusionists say that sensory qualities are illusory, they mean that we have introspective representations like those that we would have if our experiences had sensory qualities. And we can have such representations even if our experiences don't have sensory qualities. Of course, illusionism requires that the introspective representations of sensory qualities don't have sensory qualities. But, as I noted, representations needn't possess the properties they represent. Representations of redness needn't be red, and representations of sensory qualities needn't have sensory qualities. Frankish, what if your consciousness is an illusion created by your brain? Page 10. A representation of a sensory quality needn't be qualitative, just as the word red needn't be red. Frankish, Twitter or X, September 27, 2019. Representations needn't possess the properties they represent. A representation of redness needn't be red, and a representation of phenomenal redness needn't be phenomenally red. Frankish, Twitter or X, January 2nd, 2020. It implies some representation of the illusory thing, sensory qualities in this case. But that representation needn't itself have the properties of the illusory thing. A representation of sensory qualities needn't itself have sensory qualities. Frankish, Twitter or X, February 8th, 2021. A representation of F needn't itself be F. A representation of a square needn't be a square. A representation of worldly green needn't be green. And a representation of phenomenal green needn't be phenomenally green. Frankish, Twitter or X, March 15th, 2018. Frankish's line of reasoning can be summarized as follows. If there have been instances where we have observed representations of particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities as not having the particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities they represent, then representations of particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities can exist without needing to have the particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities they represent. If representations of particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities can exist without needing to have the particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities they represent, then it is possible for there to exist representations of particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities that not only do not have the particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities they represent, but are also themselves totally devoid of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of any determinable kind. Such reasoning is clearly fallacious. It is an example of hasty generalization, among other fallacies. Before I dive into a thorough analysis of Frankish's reasoning, I think it will be most helpful if we do a bit of phenomenology first. In many of our observational activities, we direct our attention to an object, and this object is immersed within a multitude of objects. We observe the object of our attention as having or as consisting of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of one or more determinable kinds. Likewise, the multitude of objects in the periphery are observed as having or consisting of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of one or more determinable kinds. Not only do these sensory qualities constitute the what, i.e. the content or characteristica, we appeal to whenever we say that this observed or observable object is different from that observed or observable object. They also differentiate the object of our attention from the multitude of objects in the periphery, and the multitude of objects in the periphery from the object of our attention. Objects, representations included, totally devoid of sensory qualities, would be nothing to us, observationally speaking. It is only by means of their apparent sensory qualities that said observable objects have actual or possible significance for us. Footnote. Indeed, in another article, Frankish himself appears to agree when he says, "When I look at a ripe banana, I seem to be aware of a rich yellow quality. Similarly with smells, sounds, tastes, pains, and other sensory qualities." However, he goes on to say, these qualities are not more present in the world around us than they are in our brains. Frankish, What is Illusionism, page 12. In a similar vein, he says, we experience objects as having a distinctive but ineffable significance for us, which is a marker of their affordances. This is what we call their quality or feel. Frankish, Bright Shiny Colors, page 1. And again, as subjects of experience, our interest is in how things seem to us, introspectively. The illusion itself, not the mechanisms that cause it. Frankish, Illusionism as a Theory of Consciousness, page 8. And yet again, we perceive things as having a certain impact on us, as infused with potent qualities. Frankish, Illusionism and its Place in Contemporary Philosophy of Mind, page 304. End footnote. Regardless of whether or not the sensory qualities objects are observed as having or consisting of are real, it is clear that it is only by means of them that we are able to single out an object in observation from a field of objects, singling it out as a particular this among other thises. Suppose that we were to observe an object, X, and X is a representation of a red sensory quality. Now, it does not necessarily follow that we will observe X as having or consisting of the particular determinate or determinable sensory quality which it represents, i.e., the red sensory quality. Indeed, we may observe X as having or consisting of determinate or determinable sensory qualities that do not even fall under the heading of color. E.g., X may be observed as having or consisting of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of a tactile, gustatory, auditory, or olfactory kind. Nevertheless, and this point is essential, we have never observed objects, representations included, as neither having nor consisting of sensory qualities. On the contrary, we have always observed objects, representations included, as having or consisting of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of one or more determinable kinds. The following scenario will help make this point more concrete. Suppose that John is observing a cup on a table, and he observes the cup as having a determinate or determinable blue sensory quality. Whenever John observes the cup as having a blue sensory quality, he has a representation of the cup as having a blue sensory quality. John's representation of the cup as having a blue sensory quality is localized to a particular chunk or region of his brain, and we can observe this particular chunk or region of John's brain whenever he observes the cup as having a blue sensory quality. Now, if we were to observe John's representation of the cup as having a blue sensory quality, i.e., a particular chunk or region of John's brain, as he observes the cup as having a blue sensory quality, it is almost certain that we will not observe it as having a blue sensory quality. However, we can be certain that we would observe it as having or consisting of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of one or more kinds. Indeed, we would observe it as having or consisting of sensory qualities, e.g., pinkness, warmth, smoothness, sliminess, etc. Although John's representation of the cup as having a blue sensory quality is not observed as having a blue sensory quality, it is nevertheless observed as having or consisting of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of one or more determinable kinds. Indeed, both the cup, i.e., the cup which John observes as having a blue sensory quality, and John's representation of the cup as having a blue sensory quality, are both observed as having or consisting of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of one or more determinable kinds. In light of this observation, what evidence is there for the following cornerstone of illusionism? There exists representations of particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities that not only do not have the particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities they represent, but are also themselves totally devoid of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of any determinable kind. If illusionism is to be held to its own standards, it cannot be allowed to defend the above claim by appealing to intuitions. On the contrary, illusionism must appeal to the empirical. But what empirical evidence is available to the illusionist? The following. We have had many instances of observation wherein we have observed a representation of a particular sensory quality, e.g., a representation of the sensory quality of redness, as not having the particular determinate or determinable sensory quality it represents. We have never had any instances of observation wherein a representation of a particular sensory quality, e.g., a representation of the sensory quality of redness, is observed as being totally devoid of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of any determinable kind. We have always observed objects, representations included, as having or consisting of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of one or more determinable kinds. We have never had any instances of observation wherein the observed objects, representations included, are observed as neither having nor consisting of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of one or more determinable kinds. Does the evidence support the illusionist's inferences? No. From these facts, it is clear that the illusionist cannot validly infer or posit the existence of objects totally devoid of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of any determinable kind from instances of empirical observation. Furthermore, it is also evident that the illusionist cannot validly infer or posit the existence of representations of particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities that not only do not have the particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities they represent, but are also themselves totally devoid of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of any determinable kind from instances of empirical observation. I'll conclude this shrill shout of mine with a modus tollens. Premise 1. If we are justified in believing illusionism to be true, then we are justified in believing that there exists representations of particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities that not only do not have the particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities they represent, but are also themselves totally devoid of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of any determinable kind. Premise 2. We are not justified in believing that there exists representations of particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities that not only do not have the particular determinate or determinable sensory qualities they represent, but are also themselves totally devoid of determinate or determinable sensory qualities of any determinable kind. Conclusion. Therefore, we are not justified in believing illusionism to be true. Thus, illusionism's foundation stone is an arbitrary and unwarranted assumption. Far from being a viable option, the coherent research program of illusionism has the structural integrity of a castle in the air.